How good of a story did we get from patch 6.1 and beyond in Final Fantasy XIV? I'm talking about all the stuff that came after the big chunk of Endwalker, the in-between, all the stuff that's going to get us through this gap to Dawntrail, the upcoming expansion, or maybe the current expansion depending on when you watch this video. I want to talk about the world building, the story, the characters, the development, and everything we got through the main story quest from 6.1 to 6.5, and see how it stacks up to this game's more than 10 years of storytelling. To clarify, this does not include Myths of the Realm or any of the other side quests that aren't connected to the main branch of story that happens between the end of Endwalker and the beginning of Dawntrail. We're also going to leave off 6.55 because that is mainly just a segue through Dawntrail. So we are talking about Newfound adventure leading all the way up to Growing Light. And naturally, this video includes spoilers for all of that story and all the story preceding it. Let's get into it. Patch 6.1 begins the Newfound Adventure series, which picks up at the end of Endwalker, where we've saved the world, the Scions of the Seventh Dawn have officially disbanded, and our character, the player character, the Warrior of Light, is free to do what they were doing 10 years ago, before this story started, and that was adventuring. This patch was billed as a departure from all the stuff that we've done before, which was a building up over the larger narrative that began in A Realm Reborn. We were returning to adventuring, we're exploring new lands, we're going to meet new people, and the Scions won't necessarily be there with us. That's how this patch was billed, but is that what we got? Kinda, sorta. 6.1 does give us a new dungeon in a new location, and the places that we ultimately visit for the most part do end up being new locations as well. Now, there's not a ton of exploring involved, and that's the nature of these things happening during patches between expansions, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, we were billed the idea of the Scions aren't always going to be around, and they weren't really around as the Scions, but rather a rotating cast of characters that filled in an NPC party when we really needed them. And I think that was kind of everybody's expectation going from the end of Endwalker into a new expansion. It would be very difficult to totally set the Scions aside and start with a totally clean slate, even though we're going to a new continent with a lot of new characters. And there's no doubt we're going to meet a new cast of people who are going to evolve and have an impact on the narratives. We've seen it from all the trailers, the developers have told us as much, but the Scions are still going to be there. Maybe not operating in the Scions of the Seventh Dawn capacity, but doing their own thing, and I think that's okay. The dev team may be a little bit shy about doing a total departure from a cast of characters that's been with us for so long. I don't know if any of you have any experience with Street Fighter, but Street Fighter 3 came out with mixed reception, and that's because there were only 2 returning characters from the long history of Street Fighter 2, and that was Ryu and Ken. Now, eventually they added more characters from that chapter of the story because the other cast was totally new, and that was divisive. I'm not saying Street Fighter 3 was bad, but the reception to that and maybe thinking about similar experiences could be at play here. So the Scions are still around, they're just not doing Scion-y things all the time. And speaking of the Scions, let's talk about them because there are a lot featured here, but some of them don't really have much to do. Urianger and Thancred are here, and they mostly exist just to kind of quip and poke fun at each other and then do a nice little Dawntrail teaser, which is fine, but they don't really have any meaningful development, and that's okay. We're operating in a short span of time. G'raha does get to check something off of his bucket list, and that is to go on an adventure with the Warrior of Light. This is a payoff all the way back from Shadowbringers, especially during some of the final chapters of Endwalker. He wanted to go on an adventure with his friend after all the trials and tribulations they've been through, and he finally gets to do it. They go to a new location, they go on an adventure, box checked. Now, are we going to get more of that? Sure, but it's nice to see G'raha get a little bit of payoff. Estinian is still around, and I really love Estinian, but he was kind of only here just to be the muscle because we needed some muscle. I found an excuse to take his shirt off, and he had some moments with Zero, some small moments, but where Estinian really came into his own is when he had some more meaningful moments with Vitra. The twins are here, and they're doing what they said they were going to do, which was help out in Garlemald, so we do get to have some time with them, and we do get some good moments, particularly from Alize involving Zero. We'll talk about Zero again here in just a minute. Now, they don't really have a lot of development. They're just kind of, the wheels are spinning. They're doing what they said they were going to do, but it's nice to see them have an impact on a new member of the cast. Y'shtola doesn't do much here developing her character on a deeper level, but she does do a lot in terms of world building and connecting the dots, specifically opening up a shard superhighway of sorts, which allows us to not only venture to the 13th, but also becomes a connecting point between the 1st, which is where we were in Shadowbringers, and the 13th, which is where the bulk of this patch takes place. Let's circle back to Vitra, a great inclusion in this massive chunk of story. Vitra has natural connections to what's going on in the 13th, given that we find out, more about his sister, Ashdaya, and everything that she went through, and how this has a direct connection to what happened in the 13th. We get a lot of really great character moments with Vitra reflecting on everything, how he's willing to go to incredible lengths to try to save someone that he hasn't seen for countless years, someone who meant a great deal to him. And there's payoff at the end if you finish the story, which hopefully most of you have since Dawntrail is coming up soon. There's big payoff there. And Vitra has a lot of great moments, not just with Estinian, like I mentioned, as well as his sister, the Warrior of Light, but also Zero as well. Vitra was a great inclusion here to have us go along and kind of fill in the gaps of the story with some world building stuff that go all the way back to the Allegan Empire, things that really involved the Void Scent, which was really nice to see. Vitra was a great inclusion here. He was a joy to have along. Perfect choice. Let's hop over to the 1st, because there are some characters that do get a couple of moments here or there. The 1st being where we travel to in Shadowbringers. Now, Reen and Gaia do get some moments here. They're brief moments, but they do get some moments in this chunk of story. Gaia being acknowledged in the main story quest and not just the Eden optional raids is fantastic. The big reason is because that's just a great story. So if you haven't done the Eden raids, you should do them. In fact, I'm not even sure if it requires you to do Eden like it used to require you to do Crystal Tower because of the whole Graha thing. I actually don't know if that's true. If you do know, drop it out in the comments and let me know, because if it's possible for you to do that without doing the Eden raids, do the Eden raids. We see that Reen has been up to maintaining order in the 1st, working towards restoring more of that world. Gaia is there also assisting, and it's not just the two of them, but we also have some folks originally from the 13th who are present in the 1st. We've known about one of them for a long time, and I'm talking about Unukalhai and Silva. Unukalhai. I've said it 2 different ways. I can't remember. I feel like one of the characters said his name like verbally, but maybe I'm wrong. I just went and looked in my notes and I can't find anything, and I feel like I would have written in all caps, finally have pronunciation. So how do you say his name? Let me know. What's disappointing about these characters is they were, particularly Unukalhai, was sidelined for so long. And this was really a chance for him to shine. And while he does get mentioned and he does show up, there's not really a big moment. He doesn't hop through the 1st to the 13th to have some triumphant moment, some big return for a world that was lost to him. He reflected, if you've done that story, you know that he had a big sense of feeling like a failure, which is also another great raid series that you should do. But there wasn't really the payoff there. As well as talking about Silva, we didn't get a lot of payoff there. Now, that's not to say it can't come at some point in the future, because there are a lot of instances in Final Fantasy XIV of where seeds were planted and there was payoff way down the road, and that could happen, and we could still get a 13th Void Scent themed expansion. Even though we've done quite a bit there, we could still go back and explore more of it as the world heals from the corruption that's been present for so long. But given what we have right now, those characters didn't really get everything that I would have hoped for. As somebody who's been playing the story for such a long time, I wish they were more involved. I know time is a limitation, especially with the patches being between 2 big expansions. It's just something I would have liked to see. Now, I did mention that the bulk of our time is spent in the 13th, and we get a mountain of development on this shard, whereas we didn't have much to go on before, all the way back to the World of Darkness when we ventured over there to fight the Cloud of Darkness in the Crystal Tower raid series. We get so much more world building as it comes to the 13th, and understanding the Void Scent, the way they think, the way they operate, their biology, what happened to their world, avenues to fix the world, tons and tons of stuff dropped in here, which is super interesting, and it's really good stuff. Where this realm suffers is a lack of personality, and that's, part of that is a problem with it being a world that was corrupted base all the way to the brink. So what are they really going to show? Because everything is destroyed, it's devoid, it's dark, it's depressing. But the places we do see are pretty cool. Zero's domain is a really cool place to explore. We get a lot of world building when we talk to individual void scents. We learn more about Zero there as well. It's a shame we only really get to explore that once, and then the game's like, hey, you're never going back again unless you do New Game Plus. Same thing with the Red Moon. The Red Moon is cool, but there's not a lot there. And I mean, yeah, it's the world of darkness. There's not much there, especially since we've been so busy knocking void scent around. It makes sense within the lore. It's just not very exciting to look at. Felcourt of Troya was cool, and I love the Final Fantasy IV nods, but beyond that, we don't really get to go anywhere. And patches like this, between expansions, don't usually include new zones for us to explore. I get it. I just kind of wish, since we were making this big jump to a new shard, we would have gotten more. Now let's talk about two of the biggest characters in this patch series, that is Golbez and Zero. Zero I've already done a little video about. Now I did this video before that story had finished, so a lot of it was, here's where we are, here's where I predict things are gonna go. And for the most part, I feel like my predictions were accurate, and that's okay. I do think that Zero went through a predictable arc. I do think she was an interesting character, even if she didn't finish in the most interesting way. I do think that the dichotomy between her and Golbez was the most interesting part. How they kind of started at two ends of the spectrum and sort of almost met in the middle, if not crossing over to each other's side. Zero's one who had given up on the world of the Void Set. She did not care what happened to it. Now, she did care obviously about some of the Void Set because of the story in her domain and housing the weaker ones who had nowhere else to go, but she outright tells us she doesn't care what happens to this world, and that's in the very beginning, and we have to go through a lot to even get her to assist us, because she's a very transactional being. She's not going to do something unless she gets something in return, and she's going to assume you're that way as well, because that's the way the Void Set operate. Now, she does change through her interactions with the Scions and other Void Set, and eventually coming over to the Source, and that's all good development. It's slow, it's definitely a slow burn, but in this case, I think that's a good thing, because you're trying to shape somebody's mentality who had been kind of locked in this Void Scent mode for so long. It was gonna take time, and she's not even done in terms of development. This patch very much leaves things off in there's more to do here. The work is not finished, and when we need your help, Warrior of Light, when the time comes, we're gonna call on you. And I really hope we get that, because her interactions with some characters, particularly Euless in Garlemald, who is a great character in his own right. I really would like to do a video just talking about Euless at some point, but a really well-written character, and how he kind of counterbalances Zero, talking about his experiences and using these experiences that we walked through with him to prop Zero up was really cool. I thought Golbez was predictable because I've played Final Fantasy IV many times. I love that story, but even they found a way to subvert that a little bit with his history and having us go through those flashbacks. Golbez was a really well done character here, even though I think most of us could see him turning to the side of the good guys from a mile away, but he did have good intentions. And I think that his interactions with Zero and how they have a little bit of history there, which we don't get until almost the end of the raid series, the patch series, them coming a little bit closer together and influencing each other and eventually deciding that they're going to work through this together is really, really cool. Now, are we going to get more of the two of them together? I really hope so, because there's still a lot of room, there's a lot of development, there's a lot of growth that can happen between these two characters, and I really, really hope we get it, because they were the big players in what propped this patch series up to be a decent story. Also, is anybody else assuming that the original Golbez was an Asm shard, since we never saw them speak in any of the flashbacks that we had? I could be reading too much into this idea, but is it possible? Is he the 10th shard? I don't know. Overall, if I had to score this chapter of a story, I think I would either give it, I'm gonna say a low B. It's not a bad story, and the places we go to are interesting, and there's a lot of foundational stuff that gets laid out in terms of the world building with the 13th and the Void Scent, and we do get some decent character interactions here, but at the end of the day, it's it's okay. It's not the best patch series that we've ever had between expansions, and I don't think it's the worst either. In fact, I think it probably gets a worse rap than it deserves just from reading through posts on social media. I went through the forums, I went to Reddit just to see what people thought about this patch series, and I do think that it gets an unfair rap of people saying that it's horrible or terrible or it was a total snooze fest. I don't think it was that bad, but it wasn't the best patch series story post-expansion that we've ever had, and that's okay. I think if there'd have been more payoffs with the characters who were residing in the first, resolving some things in the 13th, I think this could have been a really sensational patch series, but I understand why it had to be the way it is. And this could have been a limitation of all their development resources were going into Dawntrail. Final Fantasy XVI's development could have also been a part of that. I don't know. That's pure speculation. I could be 100% wrong, and there could be an article somewhere on the internet that says I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure you guys are going to let me know. But it's not bad. It's okay. I would put it in B tier. If we were going to make a tier list of story chapters that all kind of run together, I think I feel comfortable putting it in the B tier. And maybe what we should do is we should look at more of these and have discussions and make a tier list of the different chapters of stories. If that's something you want to see, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, because once I get deep into Dawntrail, I'm gonna have to talk about all the hopefully great things that are to come in that expansion. I know I've been quiet for a little bit, but Dawntrail's about to ramp up, so I'm excited. I hope you are too. Until then, take care, warriors, and I'll see you next time.